Set. Let's just get this back up here. Okay.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This past Shabbos, we read a very fascinating story when Miriam died. Bnei Israel complains about the absence of the air, the well, which was there in the merit of Miriam in the desert. They have no water. And Moshe and Aaron go to Hashem and say, help us out. What should we do? And Hashem appears to them. And he says to Moshe and Aaron, Moshe in particular, take your mateh, take your staff, gather all the people together, speak to the rock in front of the entire Jewish community, and you will get water. Now, being a leader of Jewish people is very difficult. You can imagine what it's like running a shul, multiply it many, many times over, and you have about 2 million Jews in the desert. And Jews are a very contentious bunch of people. And to be a leader of Jewish people, you need a tremendous amount of patience. Because even though they think they want something, they need something, as a leader, you have to know how to accommodate the people, give them what they need, and sometimes as well as what they want. But you have to do it in such a way that everybody walks away happy. That's a goal. It isn't always accomplished. Look at any political situation, any group of leaders, and any group of people, there's always going to be machlokas. So I can understand how Moshe Rabbeinu could lose his temper, could get upset with the people. You know, okay, you want water? I'll get you water. Give me a few minutes. I'll take care of it. No. They keep on saying, give us water, give us water. And I can understand him losing his temper. He was angry. And he says to them, Shimuna Hamorim, listen, you rebellious people. What do you expect me to do? Bring water out of the stone? Which is exactly what Hashem told him to do. But what Hashem said to him was, speak to the stone, talk to the stone, and we will alter the course of nature, and that stone will give forth water. But Moshe was upset, and he was angry at the people, not at Hashem. So he hit the rock with his stick, and the water gushed forth. Now, hitting a rock and water coming forth is no less a miracle, perhaps, but that's not what Hashem asked Moshe to do. Hashem wanted to magnify the miraculous aspect of this particular event, and by speaking to the rock, what's the lesson there? And there was the deep lesson that Hashem was trying to communicate, not just to Moshe, but to the Jewish people. If the stone gives water because Hashem says give water, then you have to listen to Hashem too. If a stone, the inanimate object, listens to Hashem, you, Bnei Israel, have a little savlanut, have a little patience. But no, Moshe was angry, hit the rock, the water came out, people needed it, but it's not what Hashem asked him to do. So Hashem says to Moshe, listen, Mo, you didn't do what I told you to do. You and your brother Aaron, you didn't listen to him. And as a result of that, you will not bring the people into Eretz Yisrael. You will lead them up to the border, but you will not go in. That's a very heavy penalty for losing your temper. Is it fair? I mean, as I said to Michael Epstein on chat, because he raised the question, which is why I'm talking about it now. We thank him for this topic. That a guy who works for a company for 40 years, exemplary employee, and on one occasion he took home a box of paper clips, and he gets fired for that. It's a minor offense. Should he have taken the paper clips? No. Was it such a big deal? Also not. But he didn't do what he was supposed to do. And especially so, he was supposed to do it in La'edei Kol B'nai Yisrael, in front of the Jewish nation. Yeah.
Bnei Israel did not know that Hashem told Moshe to kill him.
Granted.
That's the case. It's just as big a miracle. If Moshe hits the rock.
There's no doubt that water coming out of the rock, whether you speak to the rock, whether you hit the rock, is still a wow moment. No question about it.
Bnei Israel did not know that Hashem told Moshe to speak.
Okay, but what Hashem did was not necessarily for the benefit of Bnei Israel. It was the Moshe. Moshe, you're the leader. You can't afford to lose your temper. You have to be the model. Even though it doesn't make sense, and even though you're upset and agitated, even though these people can drive you crazy because they're Jews, you got to listen to me. And if you don't listen to me, there are penalties. People there are consequences to people's actions. Yes.
2 points. Number one, you're interpreting, it's a modern interpretation that you lost this temper. It's a very modern day interpretation. And I've heard it before, and it's common. The second thing, we're not talking about a CEO of a company that takes home paper clips. His boss is Hashem, who he had a funny relationship. So it's not the CEO.
Correct.
It's a totally different fact. So those 2 points mitigate against the comparison you're making.
Okay, I'm just setting up a straw man. So I'm going to go through all of the Meforshim on this now. Granted, Moshe was not your normal employee. He had a very special relationship. And it's because Hashem felt that Moshe, I don't know, betrayed the relationship perhaps. But again, did the punishment fit the crime? And that's a question that, first of all, everybody asks, but it's difficult to ask that question because you're talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are many, Hashem had many options to display. I mean, again, a leader can't afford to lose his temper. That's rule number one in leadership. You got to stay cool. But Kivayachol, was Hashem angry at Moshe? Did Hashem lose his cool? Or her cool? Whatever. Did Hashem get angry at Moshe? Did Hashem display the same anger that he accused Moshe of? Or was he perhaps trying to teach something else, a different lesson, which is what the Meforshim wrestled.
Wally,
Yes,
how do we know that Moshe lost his temper? Moshe was supposed to use his staff at one time before this.
correct. So I'll get to that.
Okay.
I will get to that because Hashem tells Moshe, take your staff and stand in front of the people and then speak to the rock. Now, why would he tell him to take his staff if he wasn't going to use his staff? So that question is raised. That question is raised. There are a lot of connections with this particular event. Perhaps the Chet HaMaraglim is connected to this also. When the spies gave their false report about the dangers of going in, were it not for the Chet HaMaraglim, they would have gone into Eretz Yisrael right away, and none of this would have happened. So maybe there's a connection there. Some of the Meforshim raised that Hashem was waiting for an excuse, perhaps, that Moshe, because he disobeyed Hashem, could not enter the land. A lot of different Meforshim here. And again, later on, in the end of Parshas Ha'azinu, in Devarim, Moshe is told, go up to Har Nevo. Go up to Har, and it's repeated again, because Lo Kidashtem Osi, you didn't sanctify my name. You hit the rock instead of speaking to it. There are several occasions where Moshe is criticized for not speaking to the rock and hitting it instead. Again, the miracle was just as great a miracle as Milty points out, but nevertheless, it wasn't what Hashem wanted. And that's Rashi, simple interpretation. Rashi simply says that because he disobeyed the direct command of Hashem, he didn't do what he was told to do, regardless of the result. That's why he was punished. The Ramban points out, as I just mentioned with Nathan, that we never find a situation where Moshe is told to take his mateh without using it. Whether it's turning it into a snake, whether it's splitting the sea, whatever it might be. He's never told to take his, so why did Hashem tell him, if he wasn't supposed to hit the rock, Hashem told him not to hit the rock, but Hashem told him to speak to the rock, but why did he take the staff? What was the purpose of holding the staff? Was it symbolic? Was that?
Setup.
Okay, it was a setup. Again, is Hashem playing games with Moshe? A lot of difficult questions here. The Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim, is not bothered by the Ramban's question. And he says sometimes that the staff is symbolic. Just being there at the time of the miracle is sufficient. It was supposed to be, as he says, present but not active, if I can use that terminology. And the Rambam lists two other occasions, three altogether, where Moshe got angry and he made mistakes. And this was one of the classic ones. But he was, how do we know he got angry? It doesn't say Moshe got angry, but how did he talk to the Jewish people? He said, Shimona Hamorim, listen up, you rebellious people. Well, that sounds like a person who's angry. And this is the Rambam's take. He was supposed to be the model leader who exemplified what they call tikkun hamidos, being in control of your temper. But by getting angry, he actually committed a chilul Hashem. A person in your position should not. It's the same thing. If you have somebody who is a great Talmud Chacham, a Gadol b'Yisrael, and a respected person, you're under the microscope. You're magnified. Everybody watches every move that you make to learn something from you. If you have a great Rebbe, you watch how he puts on tefillin and how he davens. You watch how he walks. You watch how he talks. I mean, the Gemara talks about cases of Talmidim who used to hide in their Rebbe's closet to observe every aspect of his own personal behavior, to learn from him. So if Moshe was going to be such a great person, we have to learn from him. And apparently he blew it at this particular case.
Well,
and this is the Rambam's take. Yes, Julie.
Any of the Mepharshim defending him since he was told to take the mateh?
No.
Okay.
I mean, the Ran simply says that he took the stick, his mateh staff, but it wasn't necessarily to use it, just to be present. It was an important object, like a king's scepter, so to speak. It symbolizes his leadership position, but he wasn't necessarily meant to use it. The Ramban doesn't think that Hashem punished Moshe for getting angry, because there are other examples when he got angry and he wasn't punished. And the Torah doesn't specifically say he got angry, even though he addresses the people in a very angry tone. We don't see Aharon getting angry. He was there at the time. Why weren't the people punished for not having faith in Hashem? I mean, the whole business of complaining, give us food, give us water, all these things. The people were complaining. The only punishment they had was a big punishment. Because of the Meraglim, they were forced to wander for 40 years and not enter Eretz, because if you should look at a map, they could have entered Eretz Israel in less than 2 weeks from Mitzrayim. Across the desert, less than 2 weeks, they could have been there. Instead, in 2 weeks, it became 40 years because of the believing the Meraglim. Again, they were slaves, they were afraid of anything that would challenge their freedom, whatever. But in any event, the Ramban and the Rambam have a serious machlokas. And part of the discussion as to whether or not is anger bad all the time? Is there ever a time where it's justified? And also, how often does anger lead to poor judgment or making mistakes? Yeah.
I think this line Moshe's when he destroyed the process.
When he destroyed what?
Frustration. When Moshe destroyed when he wrote the Luchos.
Wrote the Luchos,
What was
yes.
his state of mind? What was what was that? Was it anger?
Okay, so
Frustration?
very good question. When Moshe broke the tablets, was he angry? Or I would ask you, was he disappointed? Rashi's comment on the spot right there, if you look at he quotes the Medrash, that Hashem, in that case, agreed with Moshe. And the quote is, Yasher kochacha sheshibartem. Shekoach for breaking the luchos. You were right, Moshe. They don't deserve it. And he wanted to wipe them out until Moshe said, give them another chance.
Did Hashem tell him to break the
No,
law? So he did it on his own.
did it on his own.
Says when you are out motion.
Yeah,
So
Moshe was angry, but I would interpret this anger more as disappointment. You just came off of Aseres Hadibros, Mamad Har Sinai, Kodesh Baruch Hu spoke to the people. Wow, all of a sudden you're worshiping the idol. You couldn't wait one more day till he came down from the mountain.
and Hashem made Israel mud, and did all these other gaps, mud, everything. Then you don't have to work for a while.
Well, as I said in my introductory remarks, the Jewish people are a very contentious lot. They complain about everything. You were a Shiur president, you know what you got to the people. People used to come with all kinds of nonsense. But even so, they got the mun, they got the slav, they were fed, they were given, they were protected in the midbar from the cold and from the elements with the anan. And there are some people, not just Jews, but there are some people who are never satisfied. And again, you're not talking about a shul membership of 400 people. You're talking about 2 million people in the midbar, spread out over a huge amount of land. How do you keep them all happy at the same time? That's challenging.
What's the time frame?
What do you mean, what's the time frame?
Time frame. How much later? You said they could have gone directly into.
They could have gone right in, right.
When
When they left Mitzrayim and after Kriyas Yamsuf, wherever Kriyas Yamsuf took place, that's a separate shiur all by itself. But when they were challenged by the Meraglim, let me rephrase the question. If he was so close to entering Eretz Yisrael that he could send in spies to check out the land, they were very close. They could have gone into the land shortly after leaving Mitzrayim. That's why I said the spies, check it out. They came back and they were scared. So they gave all these phony reports except for Yeshua and Kalev. And as a result of that, they had to wander for another 4 decades in the Midbar. So none of the people who left Mitzrayim actually entered Eretz Yisrael, except Yeshua and Kalev. They were the only 2 that entered Eretz Yisrael from the Dor HaMidbar.
So why you could say, why did Yeshua and Caleb not take it upon themselves to convince other Meraglim what they said?
They tried.
So then they were faulty too with it.
Well, not they were faulty, but when you have 10 against 2, it's difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I can only tell you what the Chumash tells us. Again, I don't have time to go into the whole, what's the psychology of a slave mentality? Psychology, when you were 2 centuries a slave, and your parents and grandparents were all slaves, the notion of anything that you're not used to is very alien. It's very difficult to conceive, even the whole notion of freedom. In our own America, today's Independence Day. on when slaves were first freed, most of them stayed on the plantations where they were enslaved. So they got paid a pittance for working this time, and they were free to go if they wanted to, but they had no way. Their mind frame was such that they couldn't understand what total freedom means. If you're a slave and your master gives you everything, gives you a place to live, gives you food to eat, little as it may be, that's all you know. The independence is very difficult if you've been a slave. Hard. And they were afraid. So when they saw what was in Eretz Yisrael, they said, wait a minute, there are nations living there, and they have weapons, and they have armies. We're slaves. We don't know how to fight. That was a lack of faith in Hashem. Hashem says, I will fight for you. I will help you win the battles. They were free. So there was a shortcoming in a part of the Jewish people at that time. Yes.
So just maybe you said this is something with the culture with somewhat of anger, maybe other issues as well. Now there's anger here, maybe with Iraq. Maybe at this point, Moshe is just, let's say, becoming an angry bird. But the people, I remember growing up in Borough, someone that opened up a school, I won't mention the name because I never tried to remember.
Right.
He was the nicest guy, right? Within 5 years, he knew all the crazy people. He became not such a nice guy. When we started talking, he became like Moshe, basically dealing with 2 million people who caused them such problems that at this point, maybe he couldn't do it anymore. He was not ready for the next step.
As I said in my opening remarks, I don't really blame Moshe. As I said, make a kal v'chomer. All the nonsense that a president of a shul has to deal with, or a president of the United States has to deal with, multiply it many-fold when you're dealing with 2 million Jews, all in the same place, all at the same time, who've never known freedom before, who are asked to follow this pillar of smoke and a pillar of flame in the middle of the desert. They've never been in the desert. They don't know what it's like. And by the way, desert does not just mean sand. People have a misguided notion that the Midbar means like the Sahara Desert. The Midbar means wilderness, not desert. It's a terrible translation. And if you ever traveled in the area near the Machtesh, outside of Beersheba, or some of these places, or near where the non-existing atomic reactor is in Israel, you see what wilderness is. It's brush, it's rocks, some sand, but it's not just a desert. It's a wilderness, and it's very scary. When I took a bunch of kids once to the Machtesh, to this crater in the Midbar, and part of the exercise that we did in the middle of, at sunset, as the sun was setting, we had each kid, it was a group of about 50 kids, they had to go at least 20 yards away from each other, where they couldn't see or hear each other. And each one had a separate spot, and they had to stay there until the stars came out. And it was scary. It's very scary. There were wild animals running back and forth. There were wide burrows and other things. There were sounds, no flashlights. It's a scare. Now, just to get the feeling of what it must have been like for Jews leaving Mitzrayim in the wilderness, camping out, it's a scary thing. So they trusted Moshe up to a point. But then when they got thirsty and when they got hungry, he said, give us food, give us water. Enough of this camping out business. If we're not going to go to Eretz Yisrael right away, at least make it livable in these conditions. I think, personally, look, none of us are in a position to judge what Hashem does. Was it unfair of Hashem to say to Moshe, you can't go into Eretz Yisrael after 40 years, bringing them out of Mitzrayim? I'll punish you another way. Not to go into Eretz. That's what he lived for. It seems to be an unfair punishment. The punishment doesn't fit the crime, unless Hashem is teaching us a lesson and teaching Bnei Yisrael a lesson. Teaching Bnei Yisrael a lesson, don't complain so much, have faith. And Moshe, the lesson to Moshe is that a leader has to be above it all. And it's very hard. A leader has to be able to control his emotions. What you feel inside, what's burning it, you're a leader. You can't let people see what your internal conflict is all about. The reason why Hashem said to Moshe, speak to the rock, was to magnify the miraculous. Sure, we hit the rock, water comes out. It's a miracle. But it would have been a greater miracle if Moshe just said to the rock, give forth water.
Rabbi,
Wow, yes.
isn't Hashem sort of expecting a lot from Moshe, since we already know that Hashem has gotten angry himself and that's the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Alachah kama v'chama, a plain old human being, even a leader that Hashem has chosen. That seems like Hashem's expecting a lot from a human being if he's lost.
You hit the nail on the head. Hashem is expecting a lot. Hashem expects a lot from every individual. That's why we have 613 mitzvos, that we're expected to do certain things. But a leader, we have even higher expectations for a leader, because that's a definition of a leader. If a leader is like everybody else, what kind of a leader is he? A leader has to exhibit certain character traits that make him stand out or her stand out. Yes.
Let me offer something that I haven't seen mentioned. It says, "Vayored Moshe es yado, vayachas hasela b'mateiv." What's the next word? Ha'amoyim.
Right.
Could be had Moshe hit the rock once and realized what had happened, Hashem might have forgiven him. He hit it twice. That means it didn't come out right away. He hit it a second time. The second time is the one that shows I'm doing this, I'm angry. The second time is when we cross the line.
All right, could be. That's definitely interesting interpretation. That hitting it the second time was the coup de grace, so to speak. Why did he hit it a second time? Because the first time he hit it, the water didn't come out.
And then he could have still realized.
Yeah, okay. There's no question about it. Look, the purpose of miracles is to strengthen people's belief in Hashem, and also to strengthen belief in his messengers, so to speak. This is a Sforno's take on it. Yeah. Well, he didn't speak. He hit the rock. No, he didn't. Hashem said, speak to the rock. And Moshe, whether he didn't hear it directly or whether he was just so angry at the people, he hit the rock. Yeah, I've had it with these people. Hey, here's your water. Again, there are multiple levels of understanding it. The Netziv says that Moshe and Aaron should have davened for water to come naturally. And it wasn't so much a punishment, but a reflection on the type of leadership that the people needed entering the land. They needed leadership that was going to show them how to live a certain way.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Two things. Reading the more contemporary as Jonathan Sachs, the late Jonathan Sachs, he had two things to say. One, he said that what was published this week was that Moshe's sister, that he may have had that on his mind. It may have been weighing very heavily, and it may have clouded his judgment. And the other thing that Jonathan Sachs points out in prior things that I've read from him had to do with the fact that, as you said, this was a slave, the slave mentality from those who came out. This was a new generation. They needed new leadership to take them in. Moshe, God doesn't think that Moshe is the leader to take them into the next step. Now they needed a new guy. They needed somebody younger, somebody they can relate to a little bit more, like Yoshua. I mean, those are the two things that from Jonathan Sachs that I
Okay, well, there are multiple levels of understanding, and there's so much drush here, in the drushim. There's a Rabbeinu Hananel points out, fascinating, that they didn't really believe, Moshe and Aaron, that under normal circumstances, water comes out of a rock. And they said, no, shall we bring forth water from this rock? That was part of the problem. They said, Aaron and Moshe said, shall we bring water from this rock? When they complained. And they should have known that no, al derech hateva, by natural law, neither Moshe nor Aaron nor both of them together can bring water out of a rock. But what Hashem says, Yan lo ha'mantem bi la'akisheni. You didn't believe in me that I could go against the law of nature to bring forth water. And that was their sin. So there are many different levels. Yes.
Let's take something like onions.
Like what?
Onions.
Yeah.
There's water coming out. There's an oasis, right? Little wilderness, desert. So you're saying that the generation came out of Egypt, they never saw such a thing in Egypt. There were no aquifers, natural springs in Egypt.
Egypt is fueled or watered by what they call the effluvia, the overflowing of the Nile River.
So maybe that is part of the reason why that generation never saw water other than the way it was overflowing.
The fact that the slaves never saw this type of thing is not a good argument. I tell you why. The 10 plagues. Very miraculous things were going on there. Blood was coming out of the rivers, frogs were coming out, all the pestilence and all the 10 plagues is a pretty miraculous thing for them to see. Now, if
It's a new generation, Wally. This is a new generation. They
it's
may
a new,
not have
okay,
seen
but
it.
regardless of whether they were slaves or not, when you see 10 plagues happening in a way
But they
that
weren't-
is very against the laws of nature in most cases.
They were enslaved.
1 second, when you saw the sea splitting, however that took place, they experienced, every one of them experienced certain miracles that were not in the normal laws of nature. Now, 1 or 2 of these things should be fairly convincing. 10, on top of Moshe, when he first comes down to them, and he says to Hashem, who am I? How are they going to believe me? So Hashem says to Moshe, take your stick and throw it down, it becomes a snake. Then pick it up by the tail, it becomes a stick again. They saw a lot of strange things that were miraculous. And if they didn't believe, they wouldn't have all followed him out of Egypt. They all left with Moshe, every one of them. So at one point, they believed. But then somehow, very quickly, it dissipates. Yeah.
They also saw Moshe do the rock trick once before, when God said to him, the Kisa Batsuri will hit the rock on earth.
Yeah.
So they saw the rock trick, so they knew the rock trick was, and that was by hitting the rock. This was talking to the rock.
Yeah. So it's a very good point that Abe's making, that the 2 events, when water came out of a rock, one was called Mara, the water came out of the rock, and one was called Mei Meriva, the water of contention, of arguing, of fighting, because the people were contentious. And as I said in the very beginning, it's very hard to be a leader of Jews. And the more Jews there are that you are a leader of, the more difficult it is to be that leader. And if you're a good leader, you have to have tremendous self-control. And you have to be maver al midosov. You have to really be able to control your emotions. It's very hard to do sometimes. I remember, we had a president once, in the early stages, I won't mention his name, who used to get very angry at board meetings and yell and scream because people were just asking such silly and stupid things of him. And instead of trying to be calm and tell him, he got red in the face. No, he wasn't one term. He was a very good president, a very charitable man, a wonderful person, one of the early founders of the shul. That isn't the point. The point is that it's very difficult. It's very difficult to be a leader of Jews or a leader of any group of people, especially people who are new to freedom. And on this Independence Day, we have to appreciate some of the early leaders in American history who were able to take a group of people who had different points of view and coalesce them into a nation. I mean, it was, Lincoln had a difficult time, Washington had a difficult time. The early presidents had a very difficult time in getting people to rebel against Great Britain, against the king. Because even prior to the Revolutionary, you had loyalists who supported the king. And they weren't thrown into jail. But eventually, leadership takes a toll. Leadership, it takes a tremendous toll on people. Not everybody can handle it. Now, I just conclude with a fascinating medrash. Many medrashim are Talmudic. Go back to Talmud and Mishnah. There are a lot of late midrashim, late from the Gaonic period. You're talking 6th, 7th, 8th century, mostly from Eretz Yisrael, a few from Bavel. There's a famous medrash, not so famous, most people may not have heard about it, called Medrash Petiras Moshe. The medrash concerning the death of Moshe on Har Nevo. And in that medrash, fascinating medrash, Moshe argues with Hashem. They're up on Har Nevo, and he says, why can't I go into Eretz Yisrael? And he lists 1,500 reasons, 1,500 reasons why he should be allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael. And every time Moshe raised an objection, Hashem knocked it down. And finally, Hashem says to Moshe, Adkan, that's it, my mind is made up. Whether that meant he was losing his ability to argue with Moshe, but apparently the fact that this medrash even exists teaches us the fact that this was a very difficult penalty for Moshe to endure after 40 years. I made one mistake. One serious mistake. And now you tell me I can't go to Eretz Yisrael? Hashem said, yeah, that's it, no more discussion. So it's a fascinating topic. We're just touching the surface on it. A lot of it has to do with philosophy, hashkafa. Hopefully, what's going on in Israel today, tremendous crisis of leadership, which direction to go? Is it too far to the right, too far to the left? History repeats itself, that we are indeed a very contentious people. And hopefully our leaders will be inspired to make the right decisions. Yeah.
When Moshe had learned shot, Hashem himself on him, right? How do you learn shot? We would have learned shot that God is not going to say to anybody, even to me.
Yeah.
So Moshe himself would have taught the Torah that there's no yes by God.
Correct.
He had to be the example of no yes by.
Okay, so he had to be the example
So Moshe
of.
would have pronounced that same sentence upon himself on Mount.
So why does the Medrash Petiras Moshe exist?
It's a lesson for the people. It's
Okay.
not Moshe. Moshe accepted it.
Well, if he accepted, he wouldn't have argued with Hashem, according to the Medrash.
On the side there, Hashem, it says, whatever, how many hundreds of times.
Yeah,
Hashem
okay.
says, I'll tell you. So he accepted it.
All of this points to the fact that we have to go back to the Chumash and try to plumb its depths a little bit more. All right. Lahagil Torah Hadira. Try to understand what the Torah is talking about. Fascinating story. And I thank Michael Epstein for raising the topic.
It's like a baseball play. Some baseball players don't know when to hang it up. So sometimes someone has to hang it up for you. Because
Okay.
you at a certain point in your career, if you go on, what you did great for 30 or 40 years, right?
how you doing?
If you keep on going, sometimes
Interesting.
your whole career can be.
Interesting,
blown up in smoke.
interesting analogy of Moshe Rabbeinu to a baseball player. Okay.
Yeah, we did. We played like 12 games, when you
No
play.
one to,
when you play
what's that
That was
done?
what
people,
Rabbi Sachs was basically saying. He was trying to hang it up.
it's hard
No
when
one
you,
to hold him, no one to fold him. That's right.
That's the key in life.
Yeah.
Wally,
okay.
that was what Rabbi Sachs' point was, that it was
Good.
time for a new generation.
Have a great day, everybody.
And it wasn't. and it
Yishai
wasn't-
Radai Baruch Atah
did you take a picture of them walking down? You didn't say?
Baruch Shachal V'Shalosh Baruch Hayinu.
Oh, yeah.
Amen.
So for Sunday, I think we'll set it up the same way. We're just gonna add like 2 more tables over there.
All right, the same way we did it last time.
Yeah.
Last time we did it in the shul.
With Nathan, we did it inside.
Okay, whatever you want.
Right now we have 26, but I think we can get to 40 by the time we finish. A lot of people are always, they're always the last minute. They start to.
Do you know where, speaking